I'm Elena Morales, 31 years old, and I work as a hospital billing specialist at St. Vincent's Medical Center in Phoenix. On my wedding day, my husband Daniel spent 4 hours hand-folding 126 paper cranes because I once told him that 1,000 cranes meant hope, and 126 was the number of days between our engagement and our wedding. He strung them with clear fishing line above the reception table himself the night before, standing on a borrowed ladder in his dress shirt and socks at 11:40 p.m. At 7:18 p.m., while our guests were lining up for cake, the venue coordinator carried over a small white gift box with a silver ribbon. "There's no card attached," she said. Inside was nothing. Just a single folded note in my mother's handwriting. "That's all your marriage is worth." Daniel took the note from my hand before anyone else could read it. And 3 months later, I would place that same empty white box on a table and ask my mother to wait outside for exactly 20 minutes. Here's what she didn't know about that night, and about the years that led to it. In my family, worth was always measured in boxes. My mother, Patricia, wrapped every Christmas gift in identical white boxes with silver ribbon, no matter what was inside. The expensive gifts were heavy. The disappointing gifts were light. By the time I was 10, my sister Sophia and I could tell who was winning before we opened anything. Sophia usually got the heavier boxes. I got things my mother called practical. A calculator. A raincoat. A set of storage containers when I moved into my first apartment. And always the same phrase, said with a small smile that never reached her eyes. "Know your place." She said it when I chose community college instead of waiting for help that never came. She said it when I bought a used Honda with cash I'd saved myself. She even said it when Daniel proposed with a modest $2,800 ring instead of the larger one she had shown me in a jewelry store window. Daniel never treated me as if I had a place to know. He treated me as if I had a place beside him. He remembered that I liked extra lemon in my water. He learned my coffee order after hearing it twice. He called my father every Sunday even though my father rarely called him first. And I normalized my mother's behavior for years. I told people, she's just traditional. I told Daniel, she doesn't mean it the way it sounds. I told myself that if I kept being reasonable, eventually she would become kind. 2 weeks before the wedding, I confirmed everything with her in writing. June 12th, 8:14 p.m. Me, just making sure you and Dad are still coming to the rehearsal dinner at 6 o'clock Friday and the ceremony at 4 o'clock Saturday. Her reply came 3 minutes later. "Of course. Don't be dramatic." Then, after a second bubble appeared. "And remember, Elena, know your place." I stared at the message for a moment, felt the familiar sting, and set the phone face down on the kitchen counter. Daniel looked up from folding another paper crane and asked, "Everything okay?" I almost showed him the text. Instead, I smiled and said, "Yeah, she's coming." The morning of our wedding began exactly the way our spreadsheet said it would. Hair appointments started at 8 a.m. Photographs began at 1:15 p.m. Guests arrived at 3:30 p.m. The ceremony started at 4:02 p.m., only 2 minutes behind schedule because Daniel's nephew dropped one of the rings and proudly announced to the entire church that he had rescued the marriage. Everyone laughed. Even my mother. If someone had shown me a photograph from that afternoon, I never would have guessed what would happen 3 hours later. She smiled in every family picture. She hugged relatives. She complimented the flowers. She even thanked Daniel for remembering that she preferred sparkling water instead of still. It felt normal. Uncomfortably normal. Almost rehearsed. Around 6:55 p.m., dinner had just ended. Guests were drifting toward the dance floor while the photographer pulled different groups together for sunset pictures behind the venue. Daniel squeezed my hand. "You've been waiting your whole life for a peaceful family day," he whispered. "I think I finally got one." At 7:18 p.m., the reception coordinator, Melissa, walked toward us carrying a perfectly wrapped white box with a silver ribbon. "I think this arrived late," she said. The courier apologized. The room was filled with gifts already. Crystal bowls. Kitchen appliances. Checks tucked into envelopes. A handmade quilt from Daniel's grandmother. Against all that generosity sat one immaculate little white box. The ribbon was tied the exact way my mother always tied hers. Before I even touched it, I knew. My stomach recognized what my mind hadn't admitted yet. Daniel quietly asked, "From your mom?" "I think so." There wasn't a gift tag. Only my name written across the lid in blue ink. I untied the ribbon carefully. Lifted the lid. Nothing. No tissue paper. No keepsake. No jewelry. Just empty space. At the bottom rested a folded note. I unfolded it once. Then twice. Her handwriting was unmistakable. "That's all your marriage is worth." For a second, the music disappeared. The laughter became distant. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I simply couldn't understand why someone would spend money to ship nothing. Daniel reached over without speaking and gently took the note from my fingers before anyone standing nearby could read it. He folded it once, then slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Melissa looked horrified. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It's okay," Daniel answered before I could. "No," Melissa said quietly. "It isn't." At 7:21 p.m., my phone vibrated. "Mom, text message. You finally received my real wedding gift." 3 dots appeared. Then another message. "Know your place." I stared at the screen. Not because I was shocked. Because the sentence suddenly connected hundreds of older memories that had never seemed related before. The time she introduced Sophia as my successful daughter while calling me the practical one. The graduation she skipped because Sophia had a tennis tournament the same weekend. The birthday card with no signature because, as she later explained, you already knew it was from me. None of those moments had been accidents. They had been lessons. Lessons about where she believed I belonged. Daniel looked at me carefully. "We don't have to finish tonight." I looked across the reception hall. Our guests were laughing around tables we had spent months planning. My college roommate was teaching Daniel's grandmother how to use the disposable cameras. The band had just started our favorite song. One empty box didn't deserve to become the memory that replaced all of this. So I slipped my phone into my purse, straightened my dress, and walked back toward the dance floor. Not because what she'd done didn't hurt, but because, for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't have to let my mother decide which moments belonged to her and which ones belonged to me. I made it through the rest of the reception without mentioning the box to anyone except Daniel. We cut the cake at 7:45 p.m. We shared our first dance at 8:02 p.m. At 9:16 p.m., Daniel's grandmother pulled me into a hug and whispered, "I've never seen him smile this much." I decided that was the sentence I wanted to remember from my wedding day, not my mother's note. When we got back to our hotel just after 11 p.m., Daniel finally took the folded paper from his jacket pocket and placed it beside the empty white box on the dresser. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Then he quietly asked, "What do you want to do?" My first instinct wasn't calm. I opened my phone and typed, "You're cruel. Don't ever contact me again." I stared at it for 10 seconds. Then I deleted every word. I started again. "Congratulations. You finally ruined the one day you couldn't stand not controlling." Delete. That felt satisfying for exactly 3 seconds. It also sounded too much like the arguments we'd been having my entire life. Daniel watched without interrupting. Finally, he said, "You don't owe anyone an immediate response." He was right. The next morning, while we were waiting to board our flight at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, I opened a family group chat that included my parents, my sister Sophia, and my father. Instead of sending another angry message, I wrote something much shorter. The empty box and the note were received. I won't argue about them. I hope someday we can talk honestly about why you chose to do that. Until then, we're taking some space. I wish you well. I read it twice before pressing send. No accusations. No insults. No invitations to fight. Just the truth. My mother's reply arrived 6 minutes later. "Suit yourself." Nothing else. No denial. No explanation. No apology. My father didn't respond at all. Sophia sent me a private message instead. Mom was upset. "Don't make this a bigger thing than it already is." I set my phone down. It amazed me how quickly everyone else wanted to move past something they hadn't experienced themselves. 3 days later, I called my father. I honestly believed he would tell me he was sorry. Instead, he sighed before saying, "Your mother has always had a difficult personality." I know. So let it go. Dad, she mailed me an empty box. It was just a statement. It was meant to humiliate me. Only if you let it. I thanked him for answering the phone and ended the call. An hour later, I met Sophia for coffee. She stirred her drink without looking at me. "I wish you'd stop talking about the wedding." "I'm not talking about the wedding," I said quietly. "I'm talking about Mom. They're the same thing now." "No," I answered. "They don't have to be." She reached across the table. "You know how she is." There it was. The sentence I had spent 31 years believing explained everything. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Do you realize we've all been saying that instead of asking why we've accepted it?" Sophia didn't answer. She couldn't. That evening my Aunt Margaret called. She had somehow heard about the empty box. "I have one question," she said. "What? Has anyone asked what you need?" I was silent. She continued softly. "You don't have to keep earning a place in a family that keeps reminding you to know your place. Build a table where nobody has to compete for a seat." After we hung up, I walked into our spare bedroom where the unopened wedding gifts were still stacked. On top of one shelf sat the empty white box. For the first time, I didn't see it as proof that my marriage was worthless. I saw it as proof that my mother's approval had always been empty. And once I understood the difference, I stopped trying to fill a box that had never contained love. In the first day week after we returned from our honeymoon, I made one final attempt. I sent my mother an email at 9:12 a.m. on July 2nd. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a demand. I wrote that if she wanted to meet privately, without spectators or family alliances, I would listen. I wasn't asking for a public apology. I simply wanted to understand why she had chosen to send an empty box with a note meant to wound me on the happiest day of my life. Her reply arrived at 9:48 a.m. 3 sentences. "If you keep talking about this, people will think our family is broken. Your father is embarrassed. Sophia is tired of the drama. Know your place." That was the moment I realized she wasn't protecting the family. She was protecting the ranking system. I closed my laptop and looked at Daniel. "I'm done asking for permission to be treated with respect." He smiled. "Then let's build something better." Instead of spending every holiday chasing invitations, we started our own tradition. On the first Sunday of every month, we invited whoever wanted to come for dinner. No assigned seats. No speeches. No comparisons. Just food, laughter, and people who actually wanted to be together. The first dinner had 9 people. The second had 14. By Christmas, there were 23 people squeezed around borrowed folding tables. Someone jokingly asked where they should sit. Daniel laughed and answered, "Anywhere you feel welcome." It became our unofficial family motto. Months later, Aunt Margaret quietly told me that my mother's Christmas dinner had been beautiful. Perfect china. Perfect centerpiece. Only 6 guests. She said the house looked elegant. She also said it felt strangely quiet. I didn't celebrate hearing that. Winning isn't the right word when the prize is distance from your own mother. Aunt Margaret later shared something that complicated everything. "When your mother was 14, she said, your grandmother once wrapped an empty jewelry box and gave it to her as a lesson after she complained about Christmas presents." I sat there without speaking. It explained so much. It excused nothing. Pain can explain behavior. It doesn't justify passing it to someone else. Almost 11 months after my wedding, my mother appeared unannounced during one of our Sunday dinners. Daniel answered the door. She asked if she could come inside. He looked at me. I nodded once. "Please have a seat on the porch," he told her gently. "We'll finish dinner first." For 20 minutes, she waited. Not to punish her. To show that our home no longer revolved around her timing. When I finally stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of tea, she didn't begin with anger. She didn't criticize my house. She didn't mention reputation. She tried both familiar tactics anyway. First, guilt. "I suppose everyone's heard your version." I didn't answer. Then dismissal. It was only a box. I remained quiet. Silence, I had learned, wasn't surrender. Sometimes it was a boundary. After another long pause, she asked something I had never expected to hear. "Do you really believe I don't love you?" It wasn't defensive. It sounded tired. I answered carefully. I believe love without respect leaves people wondering if they're loved at all. She lowered her eyes. Then I gave her the only condition that mattered. If you want to rebuild anything, don't start with me. Start with Daniel. He spent months creating a wedding filled with kindness, and your gift was meant to hurt both of us. A real apology begins there. She nodded. Daniel joined us a few minutes later. The conversation that followed between the two of them lasted almost half an hour. I won't repeat it. Some moments become meaningful precisely because they aren't performed for an audience. I only know that when they finished, Daniel hugged her first. Not because everything was fixed. Because someone had finally chosen honesty over pride. Today, almost 3 years after our wedding, the first Sunday dinner is still our favorite tradition. My parents come sometimes. So does Sophia. Nobody has assigned seats anymore. Nobody competes for approval. One afternoon, my mother arrived carrying a familiar white box tied with a silver ribbon. She placed it quietly in the center of the table. Inside wasn't money or jewelry. It held 126 paper cranes, folded carefully by her own hands. I thought these belonged back with the family, she said. No one applauded. No one cried. Daniel simply hung them above the dining table where they caught the afternoon sunlight, just as the originals had on our wedding day. The empty box that once tried to measure my marriage now carried the weight of a sincere beginning. I've learned that an empty box can only tell you what someone else thinks you're worth. What you choose to fill it with, that becomes your own story. My mother's note contained 9 words. It arrived at 7:18 p.m. inside one empty white box. 3 years later, 126 paper cranes filled that same space. The lesson was never about the box, it was about refusing to let someone else's emptiness become the measure of your life.